Hello, my name is Kris Hartley, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Public and International Affairs at the City University of Hong Kong. And today I'm going to be speaking about public awareness and government communication in Hong Kong with regards to smart cities and smart city development. Hong Kong is an interesting setting to study smart cities for several different reasons, particularly the political aspects of them. As you might know, Hong Kong has been going through something of a transition in terms of its political situation, and this, to some degree, affects capacity for governance, especially when we consider issues of trust and credibility in government. And issues around technology and use of government technology are no different. So we can observe, of course, the smart cities phenomenon unfolding in Hong Kong in manifold ways, both under the banner of smart cities itself, but also, of course, in a variety of other ways related to government technology and uptake. So the use of technology for urban management systems is not always done under the guise of smart cities, but smart cities are a rather common framing device for such efforts. And of course, one needs to look no further than Singapore to see use of smart nation as an overall sort of narrative or cohesive framing for what the government is doing in regards to investing in technology. Now, one shouldn't, of course, assume that the government is focused only on the bits and the cables of technology and the mechanics and the technology itself. Of course, this is that would be very much a kind of an earlier generation approach to smart cities development. But of course, now we see most places giving some level of attention to the softer aspects of smart cities, not only their impacts, but also how the smart city imaginary is framed in regards to its impact on citizens, not just necessarily in convenience or efficiency, but also in things like quality of life. And we can see this in the Smart City Blueprint in Hong Kong, which is linked here, talking right off the bat about happiness and health and prosperity, and of course, also folding the smart narrative into the green narrative as well. So we often see the confluence of smart and sustainable, particularly lately, as sustainability is also linked to technology issues as well. Of course, being Hong Kong, they would not fail to mention the business aspects of that as well, the profitability, access, social aspects, better care for elderly and youth, and then, of course, at the bottom there, environmental friendliness as well. So the Smart City Blueprint is rather broad and far-reaching, and it has impacts also on governance structure. As you see here, there's various committees being formed, certain new reporting lines and responsibilities within government that are responsible for promoting and advancing this notion of smart city office to help coordinate projects and of course, other types of support roles. So Hong Kong government is not just appears not to be simply using the narrative to advertise the notion of smart cities or to gain support, but also as a banner under which certain types of governance restructuring and even some policymaking procedures are restructured as well. So it seems to be an appropriate time then to look at the softer sort of political aspects of smart city governance. And we can look at the literature, of course, on political legitimacy. We can look back to that literature to draw inspiration on how we might formulate those types of research questions. And of course, we look at issues that are consistent throughout the political legitimacy literature, such as representativeness and process legitimacy, influence legitimacy, et cetera. We can narrow that down a little bit, as I've indicated and implied through this graphic, that we can talk about public sector technology as a setting for the expression of trust and legitimacy in government, and notions like e-government and the ability of these types of technologies to bring sort of a more participatory or collaborative or democratic tenor to the exercise of public policy. Then we can talk about public trust in smart cities specifically, and there's a burgeoning literature on this as well, particularly as the concept of smart city has congealed around certain understandable and kind of shared concepts, and thus comparative studies can be done. A lot have come out of Australia, out of Europe, Not so much here in Hong Kong, but of course, this is one gap that this study will be addressing. And obviously, within smart cities, some of those public trust and public legitimacy issues are centered around not just sort of the public value and the value and efficiency that are gained out of investments in smart cities, but also things like security and privacy, which are quite common. And then finally, there's sort of a critical studies literature emerging as well. And I've written a bit about this, applying the notions of governmentality to the smart city imaginary, talking about smart cities and other types of narratives like smart and sustainable as a replication of existing power narratives, or power structures, particularly with regards to who holds the privilege of naming and framing policy problems. What are the epistemics around those policy problems in terms of what do we choose to measure, what can we measure, and thus how do we define policy problems and solutions. And then, of course, we could look at other issues around epistemic instability and lack of trust in data, lack of trust in science, which is something I think we've all become aware of in the COVID era. But it has also been salient in climate science and its relationship with public policy as well. So we see a fair amount of public distrust in certain places around the world that are casting sort of scientific declarations into significant doubt, at least with regards to the political narrative. So this critical studies literature is really quite interesting. The way that I've critiqued this literature, even though I have contributed to it myself, is that it's not well empiricized. And one thing that I've been trying to do is bring a more empirical element to some of the things that I've been writing about, sort of replication of power structure. So one of the places that we can start with that, of course, is the notion of trust and legitimacy in the policy decisions that are made in regards to smart cities. It's important to state at the outset, of course, that there is no uniform concept of smart city. A colleague, Fu Min Kung, and I have defined it loosely as the institutionalized and integrated application of smart technologies with a digital age mindset to the tasks and challenges of urban management. You can find many different types of definitions about smart cities as well. There's certainly space to do a study like the study of Julian Kircher and others in 2008, talking about 114 definitions of circular economy. And I think that a similar type of study is probably overdue in the smart cities literature as well, looking at and comparing different definitions and maybe drawing some very high level consensus out of that if that's even needed. But of course, adding complexity to this and our ability to even define smart cities is, how far do we want to cast the net conceptually? Do we want to consider, the political, the social sphere, et cetera? We certainly need to consider how smart cities and technologies impact and are impacted by those different dimensions. So it's that idea of mindset, digital age mindset, comes from the idea of smart being an epistemological frame. Okay, the idea that we can logically measure and manage our policy problems and thus apply well-calibrated and well-targeted solutions to them, what we sometimes call solutionism as well. So with that said, we must proceed with a certain type of definition, and we do so in this study. And across many of the different studies that are being done, I want to state, of course, that this is not novel. Looking at public perceptions of smart cities is not necessarily new. However, it is relatively recent. A lot of this literature, of course, looks at public trust in various specific types of technologies, some of which, of course, can be classified as smart technologies. We might call them smart cities technologies if, for example, they are used or applied to facial recognition and policing, for example. But there are all sorts of other ways, of course, that technology can work its way into urban management systems, et cetera. And most of these studies have looked at citizen perception, citizen satisfaction, determinants of opt-in, for example, is what determines whether a citizen chooses to engage. It's a sort of like a technology uptake model, TAM model of a sort. And then talking about, of course, different countries. It's been widely viewed across the world, really, and So this is a lot of valuable literature here, and hopefully this Hong Kong study will contribute a bit to that. We talk not only about the perceptions of citizens, but also about the perceptions of people who have more direct influence over the uptake of smart cities, and that would be public managers, policymakers, and even corporate world as well. So there are some studies about that in terms of the way city officials and city practitioners view that, the way sort of future politicians sort of frame their understandings and describe their understandings. Then, of course, the study that I and a colleague, Boom and Kung, did about smart city preparedness in Vietnam and the perception of government leaders and businesses of that. So the conversations are out there, they're being had. More specifically here in Hong Kong, we have a handful, not many, surveys that have been done about smart cities. KPMG survey is one of the largest ones at 1,500 respondents, looking at various aspects, including public and business perceptions about a variety of different areas to which urban technologies have been applied. Chan and Marappa have in 2018 conducted a survey of 243 and talking about not only green, but also smart, and looking at infrastructure, livelihoods, a variety of issues. And some rather valuable research there. Also, Chan, another survey of Hong Kong residents talking about the softer aspects, the brand equity of smart status. Is that smart status more valuable to Hong Kong as a brand than, say, green or creative status? Going way back, we can go back to 2012, talk about smart grids, the perceptions of Hong Kong residents about that. So there are several different studies that focus on this, but they focus on particular topics or particular context. And I think that thus calls for sort of a broader smart cities survey to look at, for example, as I'm doing in this study, what are the public perceptions about governance communication and the effectiveness of that in this context. And also, of course, more recent studies in Hong Kong are going to reflect the evolving political circumstances as well, which is why I call at the end for additional studies and additional surveys to be run, which is something that I plan on doing anyway. So this survey is building off work that I did also and published here in Science, Technology, and Human Values last year about talking about just general public support of smart cities in regards to sort of the benefits and the trust and privacy and security and other aspects. So really talking about public perceptions of the mechanics of smart cities, whether they believe that smart cities can do something for them, especially in regards to the various different aspects of smart economy, smart infrastructure, smart transportation, smart green ecology, et cetera. So there is this is a precedent for the survey that I'm doing, but the survey that I'm doing is focusing more on the issue of communications, government communications, and awareness. So in moving now into sort of the methods of this study, the 1,017 respondents, the study was conducted in October, November of 2019. One must pay, of course, close attention to the timing of that, because that was during the protest times. That was before the enactment of the national security law, which basically saw the squelching of various protest movements, et cetera. And thus, this is one reason that I'm calling on the survey to be re-administered as well, because I believe you'll find some differences in perceptions and trust levels now in the sort of post-NSL implementation era. Be that as it may, my dependent variables are talking about sort of aspirations. Do people believe, do residents believe that Hong Kong should aspire to be a smart city? Is there value in being a smart city in regards to what Hong Kong needs? And then the put your money where your mouth is question, which is I'm willing to pay more in taxes for better technology in smart cities, and being able to tease out whether there's any type of difference between those two, at least using the same independent variables. So the independent variables of interest is our awareness, and then of course perception about the effectiveness of the Hong Kong government in keeping the society informed about policies regarding smart cities. So this is consistent with the Weiss and Gerhardt article in 1994 talking about credibility, the various dimensions of credibility, source credibility, message credibility, fit with prior knowledge, and then duration of exposure to the message itself. So taking from two of these, that is source credibility and message credibility, talking, of course, in source credibility about the government being effective at communicating, and then message credibility about whether respondents are aware of the concept of smart cities. So the several control variables as well. I include age and some others. Also, the frequency of use. I think this is obviously an important variable to use when asking, when conducting a general survey pertaining to something of a technological nature, with the hypothesis that, or at least the proposition, that people who are using social media more frequently might be better informed or might have a better understanding about what smart cities really are. And then, of course, we talk about the ideological variable, which is that government policies are capable of improving quality of life. And this is a kind of a control variable. Those who are obviously more skeptical of the ability of government policies to improve their own personal quality of life, that skepticism may also spill over to their skepticism in general about smart cities, and this may bias downward some of their sentiments in regards to Hong Kong's aspirations and tax appropriations, et cetera. And then, of course, providing a better quality of life. So that is, we're back to smart cities specifically, trying to emphasize that it's sort of independent necessarily of Hong Kong government itself, but the broader notion of technology as it is applied to urban management, urban systems, has the potential to increase citizens' quality of life. So here are the descriptive statistics. Of course, these observation numbers come down a little bit from the 1017 that I mentioned earlier. It's a fair amount of data cleaning that needed to occur there, and I removed a lot of cases where all the questions weren't answered completely, or every one of them at least. This explains the difference in the number of observations between the two dependent variables. You see some of the summaries there, and of course the data that I include, the central tendency statistics, are chosen in accordance with the fact that these are ordinally scaled variables. So the median used rather than the mean, and the interquartile range rather than the standard deviation. So this is an overview of what the ranges are and how they are represented in questions. And then we get to the regression output here, used order probate regression. And the first series of models is in regards to the dependent variable aspire, which I mentioned earlier. I believe that Hong Kong should aspire to be a smart city, and is awareness and perception about being informed, positively associated with that. In other words, the more aware you are, the more aware you are of the concept of smart cities, and the more supportive you might be of Hong Kong smart city aspirations. Likewise, the more informed you feel about the notion of smart cities. In other words, the better job you believe the government is doing about communicating about smart cities is going to be associated with aspiration as well. These hypotheses were upheld, of course, with these the average significant positive effect on each of these. The magnitude of the effect varies, of course, across the model as I introduce other variables as well. We see social media as a insignificant variable there, but we do see significance showing up to some degree in age, although I didn't really attempt to interpret that, but also to that control variable, the ideology control variable as a policy can improve, government policy can improve my quality of life, and then smart cities themselves can improve my quality of life. So overall, we see positive associations as predicted along either of those. The dependent variable tax. So again, this is the putting your money where your mouth is end of this, and that is of course, to see whether people's sentiments would change and be a little bit different. Does not appear to be the case. Once again, we see high levels of significance across all interest variables, independent variables. And again, magnitude of the effect varies according to the models. We see both policy and quality of life, and the smart city can improve quality of life variables showing up as significant as well. One small note, of course, is that social media was significant at the 0.1 level for the first three models. And of course, those are the models for which awareness is examined, the effect of awareness on the support for tax money being used for smart cities, loses that significance in the final three. So we see a modest, the modest observed effect regarding the frequency of social media usage on support for taxes, to fund smart city programs as well. And of course, there may be certain hypotheses that we can propose to explain this. And in my previous studies, I've observed also that there's a kind of within the control variables, an interesting observation and kind of a counterintuitive one, in which I saw a level of education negatively, sort of significantly and negatively associated with the dependent variable for support as well. So almost informed skepticism, right? So as level of education goes up, level of support for smart cities goes down. But we see this positively associated, of course, with use of social media, but showing up only when we're examining awareness and not necessarily examining level of perception of being informed as well. So what are the implications of this? I referred to Weiss and Gerhardt again, the 94 article talking about different types of credibility mandates, and focusing, of course, here primarily on source credibility and message credibility. So talking about an issue with high technological sophistication, but also high political salience as well, given the sensitivity of information that often gets fed into smart cities programs by the way the data gathering is designed and done. So the message credibility and the reason for this study, of course, becomes quite obvious that there is a sensitivity and political sensitivity around the collection of data and around the use of that data. And in particular, in a place like Hong Kong, you may remember the protesters tearing down a smart street lamp, and that sort of representing some of their supposedly skepticism about surveillance or something to that effect. So I think that's something that's definitely deserving of a little bit more attention. But of course, getting back to the policy implication, right, building the credibility of that, having citizens understand what the purpose of the data gathering is, how the data are used, and other details about how decisions might be made as a knock-on effect. Probably a good way to build credibility and support if the government is in fact interested in doing that. So this gets back also to in regards to an issue concerning what we call source effects. So source effects are the impact of the credibility of the source on the just give me one moment. Apologies for that brief break. So as I was saying, I have just published an article. It was out on the 26th of October. And this article concerned source effects in regards to COVID-19. So we compared, colleagues and I at the University of Melbourne compared the source effects, that is, does the level of trust in government versus level of trust in science or scientists themselves cause citizens to be more or less supportive of certain COVID-19 policies, such as vaccination imperatives or things like testing centers, public testing centers. So we did a comparison between Australia and Hong Kong. So there is a bit of a precedent here talking about the issue of source credibility in Hong Kong in a technical issue or a scientific issue, and that's what we observed. So I think in moving forward, it would be interesting to replicate aspects of this, also including not just a survey, but also an experiment, a survey experiment in which we presented the respondents with scenarios, and then we asked who they were likely to trust, whether it was government issuing the mandate or whether it was scientists issuing the call for the mandate as well. So of course, we see that there are several different opportunities in order to study these issues, talking about technical credibility and political credibility. And I've tried to touch on both of these issues here in the in this study, and also in studies that I plan to publish in the future. Final note, in terms of future research, longitudinal, in other words, gathering this data over time, asking the same questions over a period of time, would allow us to see how changes in Hong Kong's government situation and political situation specifically are impacting support for smart cities. So obviously there was going to be a big change with the unfurling of the national security law, the NSL, but clearly we could anticipate other changes as integration with the mainland gathers pace. So is this going to impact citizens' trust in smart technologies? And then comparative studies. So much like the one we did between Hong Kong and Australia, it would be appropriate to look perhaps at Singapore, maybe Tokyo and others, and see, and even London and New York, places where smart cities are really a dominant part of the urban narrative, at least on the policy level, and to observe whether or what explains differences in this level of trust and also differences in social credibility as well. So thank you very much for your patience in listening to this presentation. As I understand, there will be a period of question and answer, which I look forward to. And also, you may find me online if you would like to email me any questions about this. As I said, these surveys are continuing. I'm continuing to publish on them and continuing to conduct these surveys as well. So this is ongoing work. And this paper represents just kind of a milestone or sort of a stop on the way to developing that work further. So thank you very much. I appreciate your patience, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.